Whiskey, 3 Uniform Whiskey, 3 mile 45, 34, Island Crossing for touch and go, 34 Arlington.
Arlington Municipal Airport. Automated weather observation, 2215, Zulu. Wind 140 at 06. Visibility 10. Sky condition clear. Temperature 08 Celsius. Dew point 07 Celsius. Altimeter 3013.
I was not planning to fly when I left the house in the morning. I had other things that I had planned to do in the afternoon. Next Saturday looked like it would be pretty nice, so I thought I would just go then. Once I got to the airport and saw what a nice day it was, I had to change my mind. The next weather system was already on its way from the southeast. There was a straight line of upper-level clouds running roughly southwest to northeast. Forward of that line, the sky was clear and blue and did not look at all like February. Behind that line was much darker and more seasonal looking, though the clouds were still quite high and would not have created any problems. In checking the weather to make the go-no-go decision, I saw that the wind on the ground was calm and even the winds aloft were light, so it should be a really nice time. Another factor to consider was that it was Super Bowl Sunday and the Seahawks were playing in the big game, something that doesn't happen very often. The last time it did, the entire area was nearly deserted. There was virtually no traffic anywhere, and I hoped that would translate to air traffic as well. There was most definitely very little traffic on the airport as I arrived at about 12:30-ish. After having lunch and getting the airplane ready to go, I was able to get going a little before 2. With the game starting at 3:30, I figured that things would be very quiet by the time I got back. Most of the day there was very little wind, and people had been using 3-4 since I got there. As I taxied down to the run-up area, I glanced at the windsock, and it was showing a slight wind out of the south. I tuned in the AWOS, and sure enough, they were calling it 140 at 6. It wasn't really enough to worry about, and I still planned to take off on 3-4. As I was turning into the run-up area, I got a weird indication on the AV-30. There was a flashing angle warning at the top of the gauge, and the AOA tape was all the way at the top of the green. Since I was barely moving and I had never seen that before, I was puzzled. I feared that maybe I had forgotten to remove the pitot tube cover. It's happened. Not to me, but it's happened. Out of an abundance of caution, I shut down there in the run-up area. There wasn't anyone else around anyway, and got out to take a look. As expected, the cover was indeed removed, so I got back in and fired it back up. I planned to watch the airspeed closely on takeoff for any peculiar readings, but it worked normally the whole flight. There was an RV with no pants on, ready to go from Charlie, and he went first. I followed and made a normal takeoff. He turned slightly to the right, and I turned slightly to the left at the end of the runway, so neither of us were a bother to the other. Since it was getting kind of late on a school night, I decided I didn't want to go too far and opted to take a loop around the San Juans and come home. While there wasn't a lot of wind, there were more bumps than I would have expected. Nothing bad, just not the total smoothness that I expected. I had sort of planned to land at Orcas just for giggles, as long as they were using 1-6 so I could land uphill. There were several airplanes going in there, and there seemed to be a bit of a disagreement about which runway to use, so I opted to forego the landing and just keep going. It's almost like two different flights taken together. Heading north into the bright, clear sky was quite the tonic for rainy weather, but then heading back to the south into all the clouds was almost like a completely different day. The sun shining through the clouds did make some spectacular views, though. There were still other airplanes around, but not as many as one would usually find on a mostly sunny weekend afternoon. After looping around Orcas and San Juan Islands, I started to head back to the east to get home. I typically fly down the west side of Whidbey Island above the Class Charlie airspace, usually 5,500 feet. Because I'm near their airspace, I usually dial up Whidbey approach and listen for myself to be called out as traffic to other people. That way I know if I need to look out for someone. There's usually quite a bit of chatter on that frequency and often a lot of it. When I tuned in, there was dead silence. I had to switch frequencies to make sure my radio was still working and double-check that I was on the correct frequency. I was. After 5 minutes or so, I finally heard someone on the radio. There was a guy in his Super Cub under the Class Charlie over Penn Cove who wanted to climb into the Class Charlie as he went east. As I approached the south end of the Class Charlie and nearing Port Townsend, I looked down at Indian Island and there was a ship tied up there. Even more unusual was the fact that a little to the south and to the west of the loading facility was a Coast Guard cutter just sitting in the middle of the bay. I'd never seen that before. After flying over that to get some footage, I headed for home. I tuned into the Arlington frequency about 20 miles out, and the only traffic on the radio was the Canadian folks that use the same frequency. Almost the whole way to the airport, there was no one else around. About the time I turned on to the 45, 2 other airplanes called in and said that they were approaching, but they were behind me and would continue to be a few minutes behind me, so I still had the airport to myself. Fortunately, I made a fairly respectable landing and was further pleased to see that there was no one at the gas pumps, so I was able to get topped off and get the airplane put away in very good time. The next day, I was very glad that I had decided to fly as the forecast for next Saturday had changed, and now it looks like it's going to rain. All in all, it was a very nice day.